you very much for joining us today. My name is Martin Thompson from the ITAM Review. Hello and a warm welcome to this webinar. Today we're looking at all things SAP. So we're providing a spring 2019 update on all things SAP. We're looking at SAP licensing, we're looking at SAP user management, and all of the major areas of SAP that ITAM Review readers are concerned about. So we're compiling a complete update on what SAP are up to. We have got some content that we're going to go through today, but very much welcome your input. So there's a Q&A button that you can use. It can be completely anonymous if you need to, and you can ask any questions, and myself, Martin and Sebastian will endeavour to either answer the question straight away, answer at the end, or we'll follow up with a blog post and answer any questions you have. So we've got some serious brains, SAP brains on the call today. Please make use of their expertise, and I'm referring to them, not me, and take advantage of their expertise to answer any questions you have. I've got a feedback from an attendee, a webinar attendee, saying co-workers with more direct responsibility for the care and feeding of SAP will be attending SAPPHIRE.
I saw that too, yeah.
Yes, as opposed to the people that are maybe reducing the licensing of SAP, they're maybe not so welcome at SAPPHIRE. Thank you to our friends at Vocus for sponsoring this webinar and for the clarity and knowledge they're sharing today. I think this is the maybe third or fourth webinar we've done together, gentlemen, yep, on SAP. And thank you for sharing your expertise and sponsoring this session. And as I mentioned, please take advantage of their expertise to have any questions you might have answered. In case you missed it on the introduction, Martin's dialing in from Germany, Sebastian's in the USA today, I'm in the UK, and it's very much Martin and Sebastian that are doing the heavy lifting today in terms of the content. And yeah, as I mentioned, the previous webinar has always been very popular, informative and educational, so thank you, gentlemen. So our agenda today, I'm going to give a quick introduction to Vocus for those of you that are not familiar with the company, and then we're going to get onto the real meat and potatoes of the session. So we're going to look at the latest status in terms of indirect access versus digital access. So SAP have been attempting to innovate around their license models to address the real concerns around indirect access. We're also going to look at the S4 HANA contractual migrations. Many companies are maybe exploring HANA if they've not moved there already, and SAP is certainly trying to push their customers that way. And what they're doing, very similar to other software companies, is push people to a HANA contract. It's very similar to what Microsoft have done in the past, which is pushing people to a Microsoft Office 365 contract before they're using Office 365. They're pushing them in that direction. Hopefully that's the correct interpretation of things, Sebastian and Martin.
Yep. Yep.
We're also looking at managing the risk of authorization versus activity-based licensing. So there's the authorization-based licensing is what you're authorized to potentially use versus what you're actually using, and we'll dig into that. And then SAPPHIRE, as Sebastian mentioned, is a big conference for all things SAP, and we're going to maybe speculate about what to expect and potentially how you might be able to connect with the Vocus team whilst you're there and pick their brains. And as I mentioned, this is very much an interactive session, so please fire any questions you have into the Q&A box. So in terms of the company, I'm not going to dwell too much on the company itself. I assume, gentlemen, it's vocus.com?
Correct?
Indeed it is, yes.
VOQUZ.com, you can check them out. We've done a deep dive review of SAMQ in terms of license optimization for SAP, so obviously reducing your license exposure risk in terms of SAP software. You've also brought out the SETQ authorization manager. That's what within the last 6 months, 12 months?
Sorry, say that again, Martin. I was just reading a question from the Q&A at the same time.
Just the SETQ, that's a relatively new product to your portfolio?
It's a recent addition, but it's actually been in select markets since the early 2000s. So it's definitely a robust platform. But internationally, we've added that, I'd say 2 years ago. Yep.
Okay. But if any of those areas are of interest to you, please check out their website. We won't dwell on that today. I wanted to share with you, we did an article. I was very lucky to meet the JetBlue team in New York and actually look at their SAP implementation and what they were doing with Vocus. And they actually managed to halve their SAP named user count using an automated approach to user management, an automated process. So I've very much seen this in the wild being used. And I mean, I would hope most people from the webinar from the US would be familiar with the brand JetBlue. For those of you outside the US, it's top 10 largest airline in the USA, I would say. Very, very popular brand, and it was awesome to see them making such a difference in terms of their named user counts. Just think about what you pay for a named user, and imagine with 22,000 employees, imagine being able to halve that and what impact that might have. So just to emphasize that this is, it's been great to see this in the wild. Oops.
I think you skipped the poll. Yep, there we go.
I've got a quick poll to ask before we get started. I'll just launch that. So you should see a poll pop up. What is the most pressing topic for you around SAP user compliance and license management this year? And we've got multiple choice. We've got, is it SAP license cost optimization or software asset management for SAP? Is that an initiative for you? Are you looking at indirect access or digital access? Is that more of a concern for you? Maybe put in a process and a risk mitigation around that. Is it user access and segregation of duties? Or finally, is it S/4HANA, the future, supposedly the future of SAP contract negotiation for cost savings? I'm going to leave that open for a couple more seconds. I think about 60% of you have responded to that. Gentlemen, I don't know if you can see the results live there. What's your view on those?
I can. It's actually nice to see them pouring in while people are still voting. Thank you for indulging us and responding to the poll. You know, I was expecting indirect access is still a topic that's relevant for a lot of organizations. You know, personally, I've also seen the topic of S/4HANA migrations come up a lot more in the last year and a half. So I was expecting those two to definitely be the front runners here, and I'm sure we'll be able to show the results fairly soon. I think we're at about 75% of the votes coming in at this point.
Well, let's hopefully everyone can see that. So 37% for SAM for SAP, 53%, the top response was indirect access, user access management at 25%, and S/4HANA at 33%.
Excellent.
So we can share that data with everyone afterwards, and maybe we can compile a blog post on some of the findings from today and share that with everyone. Before I hand over to you, Sebastian, you want to quickly cover Teresa's question that's popped up? Is that something worth covering now?
Yeah, absolutely. So Teresa asked if there's any word on when SAP will have tools in place to measure usage for the document-based licensing. I'm glad you asked that question, Teresa. We're going to cover this in depth during the webinar today. I can tell you right now that there's been a preliminary version of a detection tool that SAP released last June. We've covered this quite in depth because there's a couple of issues with SAP's detection method. For instance, it counts all documents that are created in the systems, regardless of whether they're stemming from internal SAP system-to-system communication or actual technical users. So that was one of the issues that we found. And Martin will give you an update later about the current status of that tool, but that's definitely something we're going to cover today. All right, with that being said, I'll start you guys off with a quick overview of some of the SAP licensing basics. Thank you for responding to the poll. If you've seen the breakdown of the different percentages, it's interesting to actually call out that those four answers, the four topics are all interrelated. So obviously, indirect access is one part of SAP licensing. User access control and user access management is a part of that. And then as you move over to S4, it's really an opportunity for existing customers to reevaluate past choices, current inventory, and make some beneficial changes to the overall construct. And I hope that we can give you a better understanding today of how all these topics mesh and are related to each other. Guys, give me just 1 second. I still have the poll on my screen, but you guys don't see that, right? It's just a window that I have, so I'll just ignore that. All right, so what is the basis of SAP licensing? I have maybe 2 or 3 slides here. We're going to talk about this for a few minutes, and then Martin will talk about indirect access specifically. Most companies that I speak with tell me that they're really surprised about the different numbers of licenses and products that you can actually procure from SAP, starting with the named users. If you add up all the different kind of categories, counting legacy users, the new S/4HANA user types, and some of the alternative line of business licenses, such as the worker or the logistics user. If you add that all up, I think we're looking at about 50 different categories that you can purchase from SAP. And it's always a surprise to some of those longer term SAP customers that tell me all they have is professional and limited professional licenses. So I would say 60% of companies that I speak with personally tell me that they're surprised that there's such a huge variety of these licenses. There's also engines, so any other product that you can purchase from SAP that has a different licensing metrics other than the named user. Those are typically referred to as engines. And if you ever looked at the master price list that SAP puts out, there's roughly in the ballpark of 2,000 of these products. There's also database licensing. And you can already see that it's very interesting for SAP and strategic to move people over to S/4HANA, because you will be required to run that software on an underlying HANA database. So there's more vendor lock-in, more money going over to SAP, both for the purchase and for the ongoing maintenance. And then complicating matters, there's now also this relatively recent concept of indirect access, which has been defined as any type of access to the SAP systems through an external interface. So it could be a third-party solution, it could be a homegrown portal. Whenever you're plugging data into SAP or pulling it out, manipulating it, that is under the umbrella of indirect access. And Martin will give you an update on sort of this new idea of outcome-based licensing that's centered around the documents created within SAP indirectly. But if you add that all up, it's actually quite a complicated licensing structure, and there's a lot of levers you can pull in either direction to influence the overall SAP spend. And one of the core points that I always like to point out here is the price differential between some of the named user licenses. So you'll see that there's something as cheap as an employee self-service license that starts at 60 euros list price, and it goes up all the way to a developer user for 6,000 euros. And there's many different shades of gray in between that makes it very interesting to understand what you really need, what your usage is, and how you can potentially influence the choices that you make as you are moving over to S/4HANA. Now, last note, indirect access, you can either license that on the basis of documents, that is the new policy. It can be licensed based on the number of users, that is somewhat the legacy approach to indirect access. Or you can have a custom agreement with SAP, which we've seen a lot of customers sign in the 2011, 2012 sort of timeframe, which I always think of as sort of the blueprint of what today became this concept of indirect access.
So, Sebastian, sorry to interrupt, but I've got a couple of questions here. Abhishek, hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. Will you be discussing Ariba procure to pay? Is that something we're covering today?
So I would like to say there are many individual add-on products that SAP purchased over time, and I would like to. We try to talk here about the core SAP ECC system. If we cover all those products, it will be very detailed. I would like to ask Abhishek to send us an email, and we certainly make contact with him on a one-to-one basis and have this webinar on the standard. If that is okay for everyone, because if not, then we're getting questions for all the other platforms that are out there as well.
Sure.
So
okay.
and if you put this up, I think Sebastian said 50 license types on the ECC. If you look up, for example, the success factors, you maybe have 150 there. So it's really, it gets very, very detailed there. But we do have a consulting department, and we can certainly help you out and give you a broad overview in an email on this one.
So for Abhishek and for anyone else, just reply to the email that you were sent with the invite to this, or just send it to martin@itemreview.com, and be happy to forward it on to the Vocus team. I'm not sure if we've got your email addresses on these slides, but maybe we can share them. And Scott has asked, can you elaborate on custom agreements for indirect access? I think you did that at the very end of that slide, didn't you?
Yeah, I'll just say two things real quick, and then I'll move on, just so that we're not spending too much time on this introductory part, and we'll hand it over to Martin. But so for Abhishek, Ariba is an SAP solution, so that's sort of excluded from this whole indirect access topic, and you can also see why that's making companies angry, because indirect access often comes up when you're investigating third-party solutions, and that's also the foundation of the antitrust lawsuit that's still being fought in courts. So Ariba, you can certainly talk about the licensing of that, but from an indirect access standpoint, not affected. And then for Scott, custom agreements, I'll give you one example. I have a number of companies that have negotiated successfully with SAP to be exempted from indirect access for a certain amount of time. There's also agreements where you're only paying for sales orders being generated. The sky's the limit. There's a lot of custom agreements that SAP has made in the past. And if you know what you're doing and know how to negotiate, there's still some wiggle room to explore those options and find one that best suits you as an organization. But like I said, I want to get through my part real quick, and please continue to ask questions. We'll get to everything during the Q&A. But to pick one example of what we talked about on the previous slide, if you're just looking at the user, it becomes very obvious why there's so much of an onus placed on the customer to manage their own licenses, right? So SAP just says, if you're using user-based licensing, you must classify your systems based on the current use. And current use typically changes over time. You have people that leave the company, you hire additional departments. Usage is very fluid. It's something that changes over time. And if all you have is the output of the annual SAP audit tool, it often masks any potential that you have to do things better, right? It's not SAP's way of telling you, hey, Mr. Customer, here's how you can make intelligent decisions. It's really a way of auditing to see if you have any exposure, any non-compliance, in order to then present you with more products to purchase. So a couple of issues with the annual audit process. It really measures your current license configuration, not the real usage. And you are responsible to make any adjustments or any changes that would put you in a better position to lower SAP costs overall. And unused licenses that you may have are not really shown to you in a very transparent kind of way. So if you want to make any negotiations, get partial credit, you really have to start with an objective baseline of what you own, what we typically refer to as the SAP license position, in order to make any changes that would really benefit you. And I do have some actual data from the field. So this is a comparison of the output that the SAP audit tool would give you on a named user level versus what you can produce with a SAM tool for SAP, such as a SAMQ license optimizer. So just look at two columns right here, and then we'll move on to the next slide. But essentially, you'll have the inventory in the column on the left, purchase licenses. You'll have the LAW output, which especially on the side of the professionals has a pretty high consumption rate that exceeds what's in the inventory. And then if you look at the real use of licenses, so in other words, if you take a look at what users are doing across the systems and then right-sizing them into the appropriate category by understanding what their license entitlements and license assignments should look like, you have a pretty big delta between LAW's perspective and the real use of the licenses. And if you add all of that up, you can flip something like a $3 million non-compliance exposure meter over to showing SAP, hey, we're actually dramatically over-licensed, which then kind of begs the question, what do you do next? How do you sort of take that shelfware and trade it in? And this is where the S/4HANA migration can become really interesting for a lot of SAP customers who are making that plunge. But overall, this was a very happy customer because we helped them to avoid the initial audit threat. And it just highlights for you how much delta there can be between the findings of an audit tool versus your own objective work when you're really digging into the SAP licensing. So that example was for the users. Go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, so that's just let me add there. If you go back, we said on the slide details matter, right? And you had before, you have to do the user classification. How come that a customer that is significantly over licensed felt very happy to go into the audit, was at the end in compliant, and there was an asking on the table for further $3 million? It's very easy. He was only at the detailed level in compliant, okay? And you have to understand how a audit team works. They come in and they look for users that are in compliant. And as there is no such thing as it being over compliant, they only find people who are compliant or not compliant, right? And if you're not, if you don't have all the churn in your company, everyone switching departments, everyone new hires, changing job roles, if you're not there, if you're not monitoring this on a detailed level and make all the changes, you're always going to have people that are incompliant. And those are the ones that are found by the audit team, not the ones that are, where would be a cheaper but also compliant solution. And this is why we say detail matters. And you have to figure out how important this is for your organization, and whether or not you need to have a tool or robot that helps you to be compliant on the detail, because this is what happened there. They have been compliant overall, but not compliant in the details.
Yeah, no, good addition. And it just, kind of underscores this whole principle of how an audit tool from any vendor probably doesn't serve you as the customer, which can be a wake-up call to a lot of companies that believe that it's generating objective results. Oftentimes that's really not the case. So we've looked at the user part of the equation, and you can kind of imagine that for engines, database utilization, authorization management, and indirect access, there's additional caveats that you should be aware of before you're submitting any audit data to SAP. The interesting thing also that I want to note here is that if SAP detects non-compliance during the audit, oftentimes you lose the organizational discount that you have, which in many cases can be significant in the 70 to 90% range, and you have to buy that new inventory either at list price or at significantly lower discount level. So it really does pay off to do this proactively and not be caught with your pants down, so to speak. So I spent a little bit more time on the introduction that I wanted to, but hopefully this gives you the right background to now move over into indirect access, and you'll see that it's really just a continuation of some of the challenges that we just highlighted. With that being said, Martin, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sebastian. So let's go to indirect access, which is also, according to this poll, still the most important topic for many of you. And we just had today, we had a call with the Gartner analyst, and we were asking the same question. And I was asking, hey, isn't it, slowly the time where the questions you're getting on how do I convert my ECC contract to S4 HANA contract, it has more priority, but he still gets like more than 50% in indirect access. So it's still a big topic out there, and we've seen it from the questions here. So let's have a look. Many of our customers still think they don't have an agreement on indirect access. Just to make it clear, every one of the SAP customers has an agreement that talks about or that covers indirect access. It's only that the old contracts do not make a distinction between direct and indirect access. They just talk about use, whether it's direct or indirectly, okay? And this is also defining how the old legacy model is licensed. is licensed based on named users. Okay, whether you use the tool directly or indirectly, you need a named user license to do that. This is what happened to Diageo. They connected Salesforce and SAP, and people were raising purchase orders via Salesforce, but they went to SAP and there the fulfillment was handled, and so they needed the right license for this one, and then you can argue whether it's a special one or not. But it is an end user license. That's the old model, and everyone has that in their contracts. Before we had the question, what are those custom agreements? SAP was very open to customers that said, hey, I want to digitize this process, have here this external solution, feeding this information into SAP, make an agreement, usually volume-based, like we have it now, but on a single instance, on a single use case, and you could struck a deal, say, I can raise that many purchase orders or orders, whatever, and this is my license for it, and was working like an engine or a package license, okay? And that is the old world. We have linked there on the slides, and now they will be sent out afterwards to everyone at the session. You have linked also guides from SAP, how this should be understood, and you have the PDF links on that slide. And now with April last year, there was digital access introduced. What's the difference? The difference is with the old model, every indirect access apart from the static read, which is basically one static data dump into a BI tool, everything else needs to be licensed with the named user license. Now, we have defined clearly 9 different document types. Some of them count as one, some of them count multiple based on line item levels, and some of them only count 20%, but basically it's only those 9 occurrences, and it's only the initial create of one of those documents that factor into this one. Okay, so it's a very, now it's much, much better defined. You don't have, if you don't do anything outside of this, it's going to be completely free of charge. And it's only the initial create of those 9 documents. So that sounds much easier and much more transparent. A very important difference that you have to understand is you either go fully into this new model or you don't go into it. In the old world, you had a solution for a specific use case, and you made an individual deal for that one if you want to do that. But in the new one, you either go with everything or you go with nothing. And this gives you some issues you should think about. And this gives you some certain occasions. Some of them are beneficial for you and some are not, right? So let's have a look. Now on the price list, the standard price and the lowest tier of volume discounts for one document is 50 cents. And the standard price for one ESS license is 125 euros. That's directly from the price list. Time documents are part of the 9 documents. And if we're looking for, I'm clocking my time into the system, that's that's a classic indirect access, and that's a classic for the ESS self-service license. So according to the old model, you buy a license for 125 euros, and then everyone can clock his time to the system. According to the documents, now we would count documents. You come and you go, that's 2 documents minimum a day. Let's take them, 220 working days, 2 documents a day makes 220 euros. It's a price increase for 80%, okay? So that's a bad use case for you. If you have this one, you better make sure you negotiate either a very, very good price on the digital access document price, or you stay on the old model. But also a very popular connection to the SAP, connect a system where you can deal with purchase invoices, and then have a workflow maybe outside of SAP on a nice web portal to sign off on these purchase invoices from any department heads. And in this example, signing off on a purchase invoice, that is not even a create transaction. This is, you change an existing document, and only the initial create now will be charged according to the digital access pricing model. So what we're looking here is something that before signing off on purchase invoices was at least a limited professional license, something that has a 4-digit license price, so a couple of thousand or more than €1,000. And now it's completely free of charge, okay? And that might be any department heads and productive departments that usually don't use SAP. And before they needed a user license, now they're completely free of charge. So what's the, I mean, those are two extremes, okay? And there are many, many in the middle. What's the takeaway of these two examples? If you have to decide in full for the digital access pricing model or the legacy model, and have to negotiate a good price that you're willing to pay for a document, you need to know all your use cases. You need to make this analysis, what is the cost for in the new and in the old world, and then only you can decide what's the right pricing for you. So it is quite an exercise you need to do. Do it up front. Just a couple of weeks ago, we've been talking to a large customer in Southeast Asia, and they said, yeah, they signed off already on digital access, but for them it was, you know, the cheap mitigation for an audit outcome. Don't get yourself in this situation where you cannot make up your mind about all those use cases, and have a look at this one before you do that.
Martin, if coming back, okay, can I just add something real quick?
Sure.
So to the audience overall, you know, Martin gave you two examples, and you can already imagine that there's dozens of different business processes that, you know, if you're using third-party applications, they can have an impact on your document consumption rates. And there's also beneficial processes that would be cheaper for you to utilize under the new indirect digital access policy. But, you know, overall, I think we've delivered about 50 projects last year globally for indirect access analyses. And the biggest, you know, benefit that you can have is really bringing together multiple stakeholders, because you can see that this is not something that is just managed by the SAP Basis team or just by procurement. You really have to pull together cross-functional teams in order to get to the bottom of all of this, just due to the complexity. And so here's one question that we're getting, Martin. How widely do we see this digital access program being adopted by SAP customers around the world? Is it gaining momentum over the legacy model? Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, honestly, we're speaking to more and more customers that have signed on, that are in negotiations. Customers like that it's more transparent, that it's clear, it's those 9 documents. And they were able to strike good deals. We hear about great discounts on and over the top of the price list. And as in my example, it's also if an audit finds indirect access issues, that's usually the best way to mitigate. And this is the way how SAP gets people doing this, right? And we can only say, you know, be there, proactive, make your mind up, approach them, you get the better deal. Because what you have to keep in mind, what is the driver behind all this? The driver behind all this is IoT. In IoT, it's very hard to say where is the named user. You know, what is a sensor in a production plant being a named user for? It's not a user, and it's not named, and there could be potentially huge fights. But a document created is a document created, and there's no huge fights. The interpretation is clear. And this is what's behind it. And this is why SAP wants to go this way, to have this clear. And I think in times of IoT and digitalization, it's the right way to do. But you have to make a good deal for yourself, and all your use cases have that in mind. So it's adopted more and more, and I'm actually surprised that I have that many customers. I didn't expect it to happen that fast from the responses that we're getting. And there's a question from Deepke regarding the loyalty program license work. I'm actually not sure, not very familiar with this one, but it is actually quite easy, because you have those 9 different document types. So if it doesn't create one of those 9 documents, it's in the digital access world free of charge, right? So and if it comes from somewhere else, then it needs to be licensed under the legacy model. We had the question before, where are we and when is SAP out? There's now the new USMM out there. The new USMM is, as the old note from last year, able to count documents. But it is not able yet to distinguish between documents that have been created from another SAP system or documents that have been created from an outside system. And only the later ones are chargeable under digital access. What SAP announced and should have been in place so far is a thing that they call passport. So once an SAP system creates a document, it will tag it with a so-called passport. And when you have the passport, you're free of charge. If you don't have it, you're going to be charged. That is not yet in place. We look in, maybe we get some new estimates when that arrives in at the SAPPHIRE, and there's actually also a session on licensing there, multiple sessions. We have them later on the slide, and maybe we get the timing there. But right now, it should have been in place already, but it isn't, so it's delayed, but should be there soon. And there's a USM2 out there now that can count the documents. You don't need to use that note anymore. Right now, what SAP does, they live off estimates, basically, and we've seen this in a couple projects. They come in and say, hey, we found that many documents, 10 million, and don't you also think, when we look about what you're doing, what your business model is, 40% will be indirect. And then they strike deals based on this estimate, and nobody knows, if you don't use a tool yet, what is the correct count. And actually, you might think this is a bad situation. It's a great situation for you guys out there. Use that. How great would it be if they come up, let's say 40% is indirect access, and it's 60, and you strike the deal with 40, that's a 33% discount for you. And if it's only 20, you have the numbers and you have the transparency. You can pull them up and say, hey, no, it's only 20%. Here's the proof. And you strike the fair deal. Put yourself in this negotiation, in this role. So what you have to do on this one is very easy. On basically make an analysis of all your technical users, all your interfaces into your SAP. Have a look them, where are really one of those 9 document types created and from the outside, which is an outside system and which is not. And then you just run the document count on those interfaces. And with a tool like Exemplar, you can do this, and then you get the correct document count right now, and you're one step ahead, and you will be, the one in the negotiation that holds all the information, and you turn the key. Usually SAP comes from an audit, gets all the detail and confronts you with it, and you go in defense. And here you can put yourself in the same situation, just that you have the clarity now over all your systems. And there are tools out there where you can do that. And just the closing remarks on indirect access, the antitrust suit is still out there. Experts predict that SAP has to change the model, maybe once again, put some more transactional-based model into this. Maybe we hear something on SAPPHIRE. We actually don't expect it to be that soon because it's a pending lawsuit, and maybe this only comes 2020. But be sure that if it's not this lawsuit, then there's be another, another industry trend that will be changing this model also. And we frequently do these webinars. We have a blog on our site. We will try to keep you informed of one or the other way, right? We have a question. Do you offer a template for end users to map out and perform the scenario analysis for legacy license, whether the outcome based? There's not really templates, but we do this in projects. We use the document count that you just showed, and the analysis also shows you on the technical users, whereas, for example, only change transactions, and that will fill in the legacy model. So we do the comparisons. We have tools to make this analysis very easy from a technical side, and when we have to do with you the business analysis, and as a result of a consulting project, we answer exactly those questions. Sebastian, that gets it back to you for the next topic. How do a license or I migrate my contract to an S/4HANA contract?
Great, thanks a lot, Martin. And maybe to just piggyback off of that question we got, why would you even compare the legacy versus the new document-based scenarios? The interesting thing is that even though SAP might make it all look very cut and dry, that there's only this new policy for documents going forward, as an existing customer, you actually do have to make that choice, whether you want to migrate over to the documents or whether you want to license it in a different way. The bottom line for everyone on the call today is that with the latest update of the audit tool, that's the USMM 2.0 that Martin talked about, SAP will start detecting these documents as a regular step of the annual audit. So you can already imagine if the SAP team and the procurement team, they're not prepared for these conversations, it's going to cause some chaos, and people are going to be surprised by this. So there is an option that you have. There's a decision that you need to make, how you want to license this. And now that we're about to talk about S/4HANA contractual migrations, you'll see some of these concepts that we talked about today kind of come together, and you'll see the impact that they might have on your migration path. So as you're going to S4, you're considering to go to S4, oftentimes, whether you're migrating partially or completely over to the latest generation of SAP products, you are faced with the decision. Do you want to create a completely new licensing construct? Do you want to hold on to your existing agreement and only make minor changes? Or do you specifically use this as an opportunity to actually trade in what's been purchased in the past in order to then optimize the types of licenses and products you purchase based on the real consumption across all of your lines of businesses, right? So you can see this is really a great opportunity if you're considering to make that move over to S/4HANA. And in terms of indirect access, it's part of the standard S/4HANA policy. So this is also why it's a really relevant topic to consider, because it's often a source of surprise to companies if you're investing heavily in innovation and you're sort of doing edge computing, adding IoT devices. It can really make those licensing counts explode. So some of the challenges that you should consider when you're looking at S4 is what license types are available and which are required. We said earlier on the very first slide, there's a huge amount of different products and licenses. So make sure you're aware of what you can potentially purchase and what best fits your business needs. And then do that analysis. Is your current licensing situation better than the S/4HANA template that SAP might suggest to you? Do I have to make a change, or do I maybe want to stick with my current licensing model? And keep in mind, as I said, when you switch over to S/4HANA, make sure you sort of address this topic of indirect access head on, because it's often the suggested method of licensing this with SAP. I'm only going to touch on the last bullet under opportunities. You are able to eliminate all contracts and create just one single license agreement. This is also interesting when you're doing mergers and acquisitions and you want to roll everything up into a single contract. Terrific opportunity to negotiate well, and it really helps to have someone who's well-versed in licensing best practices for SAP in your corner to help you drive that negotiation. I'm looking at the time, and we have about 15 minutes left. So please consider this some bonus content. You can download these slides after the webinar. Essentially, what we have here are a couple of use cases: Concur, HCM, Ariba. I think we actually got a question about Ariba earlier. Think through the impact on your architecture and third-party applications and even SAP products as you're considering the S/4HANA migration. Oftentimes, products that you've relied upon for decades, they have to be replaced, whether that's forced or intentionally done by the customer. There's a lot of dependencies when you're making over the switch to S/4HANA, especially for companies that have been running SAP for a long, long time.
Sebastian, just to interrupt, sorry.
Sure.
We've gone through a lot of content here. We're going to provide a recording afterwards if you want to go revisit some of this stuff. Also, I'm sure Sebastian, you'd be happy to share the deck if anyone reaches out to you. So
yeah.
if you don't mind putting at some point, if you could put your email address in the chat box for everyone to see, and then they can always reach out to you if they want a copy of the deck.
Absolutely. I think Martin's is maybe working on putting that in right now. Martin, if you don't mind doing that, because I'm still talking, but
I put the emails in, and also just the remark, we're going to have the deck also to download from our webpage at focus.com. But I put our emails, should just give us the contact, okay?
Perfect. Thank you. So here's the additional bonus slide. Often when you're going to S/4HANA and you're investing in cloud solutions, you'll see a shift over from the old on-prem user-based licensing over to web applications, Fiori, and a lot of other solutions that might make you liable for indirect access fees. So as you're investing in digitalization, really understand the impact of what this might bring up for you in terms of licensing demands, right? Like I said earlier, if you're if your stakeholders are not really on the same page and you have one team doing X and another team doing something else, it can really get messy from a licensing perspective. And that's why we always suggest before you sort of make that leap to S/4HANA, create a baseline understanding of your architecture and also your database usage and a couple of other points that I'll summarize on the next slide. And use this as an opportunity to bring your teams together and drive the best deal with SAP that will protect your interests for the next 5 to 10 or 20 years even. Quick note on HANA database. There's different flavors of HANA. HANA obviously being the database product that is the underpinning of the S/4HANA software. So you have to run that in a SAP HANA database. And there's even for that different ways of licensing that. You can do it based on peak usage, which often actually changes throughout the year. And you'll see that graph as an example at the bottom left. So you might have a huge peak in January and much lower consumption throughout the year. But what you're paying for in that licensing model is that peak usage. So just be aware of the different types of licensing models that you have as an option. Also, runtime and HANA full use have some differences and limitations. So look into what all of this means and pick the one that best suits your business objectives. So before I hand it over to Martin, a couple of considerations, and I did touch on this maybe a minute or two ago, but start with the functional analysis. What are your data sources? What are your integrations that you have? This is sort of an example of where indirect access can become a problem. And then perform an architectural analysis. I've seen many cases where large multinational companies are moving over to S4. They're assuming one license price, and then things like disaster recovery or high availability, if you want to ensure business continuity, it can really change the overall price. So also you want transparency on the list prices SAP has, and get as much credit as you can for training or losses of existing licenses. So a lot of levers that you can pull if you're aware of the negotiation options. All right, Martin, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So let's talk about just 2 slides to come. Let's talk about the authorization versus activity-based licensing. Basically, SAP followed in their audits a strict audit after activities. So if they came to a customer and they were looking whether everyone is correctly compliant licensed, they looked for people who, what they did in the system and how does the license type that is associated with them fit into this. Starting in the last years and confirmed last year at SAPPHIRE, there was the licensing session, there was the head of global audit in there. He pointed out that in many, many contracts, SAP does have the right to audit and license and demand licensing after authorizations. And obviously, you might be authorized to do more than you actually do. And because the authorization concept in SAP is not so easy, and SAP never pressed on this one, a lot of the roles in the authorization concept are not cost optimized, but optimized to segregation of duty and compliance and these things, right? So this is now a potential threat to everyone. We have here on the right-hand side an example for a contract where one contract is talking about both concepts. The one license under 1.1 is a license that a named user who performs, that's activity-based, and 1.2 is a license a named user authorized to perform, right? That's the difference right there. So have a look at your contracts, whether this is a topic for you or not. Last year's German user group meeting then, which was in November or late October, I can't remember, but later than SAPPHIRE, there was another session and SAP said, yeah, they will start doing this. They pulled back a little bit on this one, but it's definitely something that they're going to pursue in the long run. And this is a source for a lot of revenue if you don't have your roles and authorizations under control. So basically, what does that mean? That means that user management and authorization management becomes part of your license management, right? Right now, the some companies are only reading out what is the inventory and how are the licenses assigned to the users right now. And they don't care about the right and compliant classification of users. And if they have an overview of this, they actually sometimes ahead of the curve of many. If you then put in, a solution that can automatically check the compliance and the classification and the cost optimized classification for every user, do get to a lot of savings, but you're still running that compliance risk that the authorizations could be bigger. And the new life cycle of license management looks like, look at your shelfware, try to use it in negotiations and identify it before to reduce the cost of shelfware and reduce the cost of maintenance for something that they don't need anymore, right? Check compliance, make sure that you're compliant on the detailed level, as we've seen in the introductory example for Sebastian. They haven't been compliant on a detailed level, but very compliant all over there, but still running into problems. We talked a lot about indirect access. Once again, look at your model. The digital access model is a nice thing to have because it's very transparent, but it can be much, much more expensive if you don't know your use cases. Look at the user classification, and the new thing, look at the authorizations for every user. And what you need to do, it's very easy. You need to find out what's the difference. What would be the license type for every user based on activities, and what's the user type based on authorizations. And if you know the difference, you can still optimize if you have a contract that is under authorization. You just have to get your other authorizations under control. And this is obviously what we're doing with SetQ. And one of the reasons why we were coming up with SetQ, which is a full suite where you can do the user management, you can do a role concept, you can check up, of course, you can check compliance and everything. You have a full workflow to roll out the roles and the authorizations to all the users. So it's a full user management suite, but it also has a hard focus on being cost optimized user optimization. But that's going to be a part of it. And you need to do this in the future if you have contracts like we had in this example. Just as a closing remark, and then we're expecting this in the next years to come, and SAP was announcing that. And look at the quote of Gardner on the bottom. Clients usually are able to reduce their spending within 1 year for up to 30% if they introduce a proper software asset management process. And our point of view, those are the 5 points you need to take into account for SAP licensing. Sebastian, back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Martin. All right, let's look ahead a little bit. What you can expect at SAPPHIRE. I would hope that some of you are attending this kind of crazy event with 20,000 people that always flock to Orlando once a year. Here's what we're expecting. So we're not expecting any formal mention of indirect access or general SAP licensing during any of the official SAP keynotes. We're most likely going to get updated numbers for the S4 adoption, which historically has still been fairly low. What that means to you also is that as these numbers are increasing, SAP is less likely to grant discounts or exceptions. So if S4 is something that you are considering, now is still a good time to negotiate and improve your license position. As Martin said earlier, there are a few ASUG licensing sessions that we would recommend to attend. We're going to be there in all of these, and Martin Thompson and I probably are planning to do a podcast as a follow-up to SAPPHIRE, where we're going to cover some of these updates. Most likely what we're hoping for is a little bit more information on that passport system for indirect access that Martin introduced to you earlier. And in general, you can obviously subscribe to our blog for any licensing updates. We do have quite a bit of helpful and up-to-date content on there around SAP licensing and user management. And if you are attending SAPPHIRE, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to meet you in person. So there's a link in this deck where you can reserve a 30-minute slot to actually chat with our licensing team. So that's it from my end.
So we just have a couple of questions left, I think, Sebastian and Martin. So first one is, does SAP still have a no discount policy for HANA database?
I'll take that one real quick. I think there's never been a hard no discount policy for anything with SAP. Yes, it's true that HANA is one of those products that SAP doesn't like to discount because of the impression that would give to shareholders and their stock. But there's usually discussions that you can have where you're buying certain products at full price and then you're making the money back on sort of a different side of the invoice that you're eventually being asked to pay to SAP. So there's definitely still options if you're clever about how you want to approach it.
Another question, I'll just summarize. I think they're saying, is there product limitations or product availability issues when you go for HANA because maybe it's not ready yet? You might have to make sacrifices to get to HANA, basically.
In general, the feature, this talks about different features and whatever, the feature richness of S/4HANA is increasing. There are now, maybe since the later end of last year, there are more and more updates coming out with features that you don't see in the ERP core now. So now it's going both ways, but there's also a tendency that their products move out of the ERP core to add on cloud products and everything. So with HANA, your product mix will change, basically. It's not a one-to-one migration, right? You're going to find stuff that you can do with S4 that you couldn't do in the old one, but you need to add on other cloud products and everything. But gives you also the opportunity to exchange it with another vendor, maybe. The only thing that you then have to keep in mind is again, digital access, because if you buy SAP products, they by definition don't cost digital access. Third-party vendors cost digital access, but only if they're in the 9 documents and whatever. So we covered that. But it goes both ways, and your product mix will change. I think this is the current status. And the similar conferences in Europe, there are SAP events. The thing with the SAPPHIRE, it's the American User Group meeting and the big SAP fair combined. This is not happening somewhere else, but in Germany, for example, there's the DSAG, the German-speaking user group meeting, which is also quite big, with a big exhibition of SAP alongside. In the UK, there's an event like this. I know from Spain. So have a look at the Sugan website where the different local user group meetings are, and there's usually always sessions on licensing.
And as Sebastian mentioned, I'll be recording a podcast with him after the SAPPHIRE. We'll try to capture as many insights as we can and share what was revealed at SAPPHIRE and any updates. So you can stay tuned for that. With that, we've hit the hour. Thank you very much for your time and attendance today. As mentioned, we'll send the deck or we'll send the recording out to everyone that's attended today. So thank you very much for your time and attention. And most of all, thank you very much to Sebastian and Martin. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, Martin. And thanks for having us to everyone that attended. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.